On May 4, 2018, airport staff at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport prepared for a long day of transporting passengers to their destinations as usual. A soldier in a combat uniform was sitting at a gate in the afternoon and was observed by airline employees to be staring intently at his phone for an extended period of time. They initially left him alone because he wasn't bothering anyone. But when he began to sob openly, they realized something was wrong. In addition, his flight needed to depart. The staff decided to speak with the soldier as a result. "Don't let him board the flight," someone shouted at that point. After figuring out why Specialist Brooks Lindsay was crying, they couldn't help but wonder what had sparked the particular events of that day. In 2015, Brooks Lindsay and Haley Wilson fell in love in Jackson, Mississippi, the place where they both grew up. Lindsay had always dreamed of joining the United States Army as a soldier ever since he was a young child. Fortunately, Lindsay succeeded in his mission and joined, and Wilson was right there by his side. The young couple later got married in 2017. The happy couple received one of the best pieces of news of their lives soon after exchanging their touching vows. They were unaware that Haley was expecting their first child when Brooks and Haley Lindsay got married in November of 2017. The newlyweds, however, were unable to contain their excitement once they learned the news. Time whizzed by after that. With Brooks by her side, Haley soon began attending doctor's appointments, ultrasounds, baby classes, and other events. The couple received some amazing news at one of the first ultrasounds. They would give birth to a girl soon. Duty rang the doorbell. Even though Brooks would have preferred to stay at home and support his wife during her pregnancy, he had enlisted, as was previously mentioned. Brooks joined and was assigned to the 114th Field Artillery Regiment's 2nd Battalion. He had to travel to Fort Bliss, Texas, for training because of this. Following that, Brooks would deploy to Kuwait for a comprehensive 9-month tour. Brooks had no choice but to say goodbye to his lovely wife and unborn child, even though he wasn't prepared to do so. Haley's pregnancy, meanwhile, was going along fairly smoothly. Brooks began making preparations for his shipment before he knew whether he would be present for the birth of his daughter. The time arrived for Brooks to start his tour. The couple was disappointed, but they understood that Brooks's duty as a soldier came first. Both of them hoped they could arrange for Brooks to be present for the birth of his daughter. Fortunately, Brooks and Haley settled on the name Millie before he left. The name for their new daughter was something they both adored. Although neither of them knew where their journey would lead them, as the pregnancy continued, everything appeared to be going smoothly. Baby Millie kept developing normally and strongly. Haley's desired Brooks's presence so he could see the infant as well, but she was aware that he was performing his soldier's duty. The birth of the baby girl was eagerly anticipated by Haley and the entire Lindsay family. Only a few weeks remained until the mother could finally hold her daughter in her arms. Haley did experience some trepidation, though, due to the elevated blood pressure, in particular because it was their first child. She continued to wish Brooks would return home in the interim. Unfortunately, not many soldiers are able to come home for the birth of their children. First, the Red Cross must formally approve the case by stating that the soldier's leave is justified. The only way it would actually work, according to what we were told, is if I was in distress. So Brooks and I have been practicing my call to the Red Cross, Haley said. We heard it was difficult to get men home for births. No matter how much they wanted Brooks to come home for the birth of Millie, it didn't seem likely. As the pregnancy was going smoothly, Brooks had no good reason to go back for the delivery of his daughter. It goes without saying that the soldier and Haley were both extremely unhappy about it. We were upset about that because, aside from a little high blood pressure, I was not experiencing any pregnancy-related problems, said Haley. But very soon, everything would drastically change. One Thursday morning, Haley went to a regular doctor's appointment. She thought the doctor would check on her there and arrange for an induction to take place a week from then. Haley had already given up on the idea that Brooks would return for her delivery, but things didn't actually go that way. When Haley arrived at her doctor's office, they performed the standard examination. Unexpectedly, Haley's blood pressure had skyrocketed. The doctor had some upsetting news. This could indicate that Millie was having some problems while still in the womb. To rule out any potential complications, the doctor therefore instructed Haley to undergo extensive blood testing. Haley's doctor sent her home to wait for the results while the tests were being performed. As you might imagine, The expectant mother experienced extreme anxiety because she was unsure if her baby girl might have a problem. On the plus side, it also meant that they would at least have a justification for Brooks to be able to go back home. The phone suddenly began to ring. We can only imagine how anxious Haley must have felt as she awaited the doctor's return call to give her the test results. The phone began to ring only an hour after the doctor sent her home. She picked up the phone and was shocked by what she heard. "My doctor told me that my pressures were too high, the baby was under stress, and I was preeclamptic after telling Brooks that there was no chance of him returning home," Haley recalled. Preeclamptic denotes a mother-to-be who not only has high blood pressure, but has also started to experience effects on her liver and kidneys. Most importantly, it might also have an impact on infant Millie. They had to take action as soon as they could. The doctor decided that they had to act immediately because Haley's condition was getting worse by the minute. Even worse, they had to start Haley's labor right away by inducing it. Haley recalled, "She told me to be at the hospital in an hour and they would go ahead and induce. The mother and child's safety was currently the most crucial concern." Haley nevertheless felt the need to update Brooks on her situation, she exclaimed. "I called Brooks in a panic and he was so happy. Brooks could, after all, now get an emergency leave of absence and attend the birth of his daughter." However, the Red Cross was required to give him that emergency leave before he could board a flight back home. As soon as Haley informed Brooks of the circumstance, he advised her to inform the Red Cross of the same. "I then called the Red Cross and informed them that it was an emergency and that they only needed my doctor's clarification. When I arrive at the hospital on Thursday at 3 p.m., they'll confirm my condition," Haley said. The Red Cross immediately gave Brooks emergency leave after confirming her condition. He was anxious to see his wife and child, but he also felt happy to be home because of how fragile they both were. Brooks had no idea that the following few days would alternate between the worst and the best of his life. It was time for Brooks to go home at last after all this time. Brooks made every effort to return as soon as possible despite the soldier's terrible feelings about being unable to stand by his wife. As with plane travel, there were some obstacles along the way though. The first thing Brooks had to do was locate the quickest and shortest flight from El Paso to Jackson. Sadly, he could only locate after stopping in Dallas. Even worse, every flight for the day was completely booked. The soldier would therefore have to wait until the next morning at 10 a.m. to board a flight. Brooks therefore did the best he could by staying at the airport. Haley's heart split in two when she realized that Brooks might be late. She realized time was not on her side by the time he arrived at the hospital. "I was certain that by the time he arrived, we would already be parents. I took what I could get because at least he gets to spend 4 days at home," Haley recalled. In the meantime, Brooks made every effort to book an earlier flight but was unsuccessful. The expecting mother and soldier just couldn't seem to win. Now it appeared that Brooks would most likely arrive home after Millie was born. This didn't make them particularly happy, but it was better than not getting home at all. Unfortunately, the roller coaster ride for Brooks and Haley had only just begun. Haley and Millie remained in the hospital as Brooks remained stranded in an airport. The next morning, her period started. Haley later recalled that pitocin, a medication frequently used during births, started at 7 a.m. on Friday after her water had been broken. The infant could now show up at any time. Brooks's circumstance remained unchanged in the meantime. In preparation for his 10 a.m. flight to Dallas, Brooks arrived at the airport in El Paso. To his surprise, there was little wait time at security, and he easily boarded the plane. Brooks might be able to attend the birth of his daughter now that all the issues are hopefully behind them. He still had a ways to go, though. At last, Brooks boarded his aircraft at 10 a.m. and touched down in Dallas at 2 p.m. Naturally, he called Haley as soon as he landed to find out how things were going. The physician then informed Brooks that she was already 5 centimeters dilated. The soldier's ability to arrive home on time seemed to be dwindling. The situation only got worse from there. The departure time of Brooks' subsequent flight was delayed, moving it from 3:55 p.m. to 5:45 p.m. This was the icing on the cake in the soldier's eyes. Due to the holdup, Brooks was unable to attend the birth of his daughter. Haley started her final stages of labor and returned to the hospital. Haley made a quick adjustment just before she began giving birth. "I decided quickly that my stepmother, Deanne, and my mother-in-law, Teresa, would be present in the room during labor. At 5 o'clock, the doctor checked me out and told me it was time to go," Haley recalled. While Brooks was separated from his lovely wife by thousands of miles, he was stuck in the Dallas airport. Naturally, he was devastated that he couldn't be there to see the birth of his first daughter. Teresa, his mother, had something prepared to make it possible, though. The doctor specifically instructed everyone present not to record anything that occurred inside the room while Haley was being delivered. Teresa, however, would not watch her son miss the birth of his daughter while she stood back with her arms crossed. She consequently made the decision to disregard the doctor and began making phone calls. Haley recalled that her mother-in-law FaceTimed Brooks covertly while stowing the phone in the front of her shirt. After all, this was the only opportunity Brooks would have to witness the birth of his daughter. But eventually the doctor caught sight of Teresa and inquired about the camera. The doctor saw Teresa acting oddly in the midst of Haley's delivery. Soon enough, he inquired about her peculiar actions. When I started pushing, the doctor asked what she was doing and saw my Dr. Brooks's face on the screen, at which point she understood what was happening, according to Haley. It turned out that a different physician, unfamiliar with the family's circumstances, had instructed them not to record. The doctor for the Lindsays recognized the value of her phone, though. Haley recalled that her doctor had instructed her to take out her phone and explain the situation to him. Meanwhile, Brooks was in complete shock. The soldier was astounded to see his wife actually giving birth to their lovely daughter. The moment Teresa was given the go-ahead to FaceTime Brooks during the delivery, the doctor spoke up and supported Teresa, just like any other husband would. Haley recalled that as Brooks reassured her that everything would be okay and that she was doing well, she could hear him groaning and saying, "Wow," through her pushes. The hours passed quickly in the interim. Before they knew it, Brooks had to leave for Jackson on his flight. But he couldn't take his eyes off the display of his phone. Who was to blame? The soldier's wife had been waiting for this time for a very long time. Brooks began to cry, as any new father would, his joy overpowering him. When he saw airport personnel approaching him, the airport staff began calling for the last passengers for the flight to Jackson, as they always do. Of course, Brooks missed the announcements because he was glued to his phone. So a staff member walked up to him and politely persuaded him to board the aircraft. He would otherwise miss his flight home. Haley later recalled that Brooks continued by saying that he needed to exit the vehicle as soon as she began to crown. He wasn't, though, by himself. The soldier had caught the attention of many passengers, who then made every effort to extend the flight time. One of them even approached the flight staff and pleaded with them to slow down. Then, an even more shocking thing happened. When the doctor yelled, "Don't let him board the flight," Brooks was about to cave and end the call. "She is here. She has arrived." The soldier suddenly went from being all in tears to having the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. Haley said, "Thank goodness the airport staff let him sit there and watch until it was over." Millie Fritz Ann Lindsay was born at 5:23 p.m., so her father still had plenty of time to get on the plane and go home to meet his new bundle of joy. As soon as word got around the airport, everyone crowded around the happy new dad. Also, people who worked at the airport said that the good mood stayed in the terminal all day, even after Brooks's plane left. Brooks did not have to get on that plane by himself, which is a good thing. There were a lot of us surrounding him. Everyone felt like they were a member of the family. "It was just amazing when that baby was born and we could hear it crying," a fellow passenger said later. "Everyone was so excited they couldn't stand it," said another passenger. Haley could hear people cheering in the background all over the country. It must have been a truly amazing and heartwarming thing to see. Brooks was also very thankful that the flight had been delayed. It was a blessing for him. Brooks would have missed the birth of his daughter if his flight hadn't been late. Honestly, it was a good thing that he was delayed, because he wouldn't have known anything while he was in the air, Haley said later. Instead, Brooks used his phone to watch the whole thing as it happened. Everything turned out well in the end. In fact, the soldier might be the only traveler who ever liked being kept waiting. Brooks still had to catch a flight, though. If everything went well, he would be at the hospital in a couple of hours. After all, the soldier still had to meet Millie for the first time and hold her in his arms. Brooks finally got on his flight back home when everything was over. After a long wait and an emotional day, the soldier couldn't wait to see his wife and daughter again. Brooks turned off his phone because he knew he would be in Jackson in a few hours. Brooks was happier than he had ever been, but he still wanted to check on Haley and Millie. So the flight seemed to last forever. Luckily, Brooks landed at Jackson's airport 2 hours after taking off. The soldier went to the hospital next, where Haley and Millie were waiting for him. Brooks finally got home after all that time. Brooks was happy to hear that Haley felt great when he finally got to the hospital. After she gave birth, her blood pressure started to go down, and there were no more problems. Brooks also found out everything about his beautiful baby girl, like how much Millie weighed and how long she was. Millie came 2 weeks early, but the most important thing was that she was healthy and strong. When Brooks got to the hospital, I told the 17 people in the room to leave, Haley said. It was time for Millie to meet her father, the soldier who had worked hard all day to get to her. Brooks picked up and held his baby girl for 5 minutes straight. He also kept telling his wife, "Wow, I can't believe we just had a baby." The soldier couldn't believe he had actually made it. Brooks said later, "I held my daughter for the first time, and I hugged and kissed my wife. It was emotional to see her and hold her for the first time, especially since I wasn't there when she was born. She is just right," he said. Brooks could only stay for 4 days, which was too bad. Then he would start heading back to Fort Bliss. Since they only had a short time together, the couple had to make the most of it. Brooks spent the next 4 days learning how to change dirty diapers, taking pictures, and waking up in the middle of the night to help Haley take care of Millie. Even though some people might not like it, Brooks loved every minute of it. Being a dad is one of the best things that has ever happened to the soldier. But the couple had no idea that their story would soon be all over the news in the United States, Haley joked. He told me that people on his flight were cheering and watching, and I told him that if Ellen called, it would be crazy. The next morning when they got up, Brooks was all over the internet. Tracy Dover, who was also on the plane with Brooks, was very moved by the soldier's story, so she decided to record Brooks as he saw his daughter being born. Dover wrote about it on Facebook after the flight. Surprisingly, the sad video went viral in a matter of hours. Dover wrote, "This Army soldier was on my delayed flight home to Mississippi yesterday. He had to use FaceTime to watch the birth of his daughter. He was crying and it made our hearts hurt. Everyone gave him room. We were all happy for him when we heard him cry. I wanted to tell you this because I don't want us to forget about our soldiers and the sacrifices they make every day." Many people all over the world were moved by the video of Brooks watching Lindsay give birth to his child. When we woke up the next morning, someone told us to check Facebook because we had more than 1,000 shares and 20,000 likes. We thought that was the end, but no way, it's still going strong, Haley thought back. In just a few days, more than 200,000 people had watched the video. Brooks said that he didn't know he was being filmed at the airport at the time. Brooks said, "I was just in my own little world. All I wanted to do was get home to be there when my daughter was born, but it turned out to be a lot more than that." Both Haley and Brooks were surprised by how many strangers came up to them to wish them well. Haley said, "I get the nicest messages, and other military wives and mothers ask me how I got in touch with the Red Cross and brought him home, as well as if I have any tips. Strangers brought us gifts, and nurses came in to thank Brooks for his service. It's been a wonderful, emotional time with a lot of support," she went on. Brooks's regiment also sent their best wishes to the family by posting a cute picture of him and Millie on Facebook. Brooks liked being with Haley and Millie at home, but he knew he had to go back to his mission. So the soldier had the best time he could during those 4 days. Before Brooks knew it, he had to go back to Fort Bliss to keep training. Brooks would have a beautiful story to tell this time. Brooks and Haley knew that letting him serve his country was the right thing to do, even though it was hard to leave their new baby. He had always wanted to do it. Brooks has a new reason to keep fighting for his country, Millie, his new beautiful baby girl. Also, the soldier and his new daughter talked to each other often on FaceTime while he was in the service. Most people don't realize how much a soldier has to give up to protect the country they choose to serve. Brooks Lindsay is a good example of what many soldiers have to go through during their time in the military. Today, he is back home and happy to be with little Millie. Unlike Brooks, soldiers often have to miss the births and birthdays of their children, as well as their wedding anniversaries. But in the end, many people think it was all worth it.